Hello there folks, it is TIJ Gaming and welcome to another Football Manager 2021 team guide. Today it is the turn of Newcastle United, the Magpies. It's fair to say they've had quite a consistent return to the Premier League. They got promoted from the Championship once again in 2017 after being relegated from the Premier League just in 18th the season before. Was that the John Carver season? I'm sure it was. That is a name that is distant in the past now. In fact, he's surely not still at the club. I'm interested in this. I know it's not the most professional of introductions ever, but John Carver's just come into my head. He's not. He's the assistant manager of Scotland. Would you Adam and Eve it? And he actually left Newcastle 5 years ago. But enough about John Carver and more about the Newcastle United team now. A team that, as I said, have had a fairly consistent return to the Premier League. They've been back in the Premier League 3 years. This is their 4th season now. And they finished 10th in their first season back and then 13th place, which you really can't argue about. They've got a good side. Newcastle are one of the bigger clubs historically, and they've got some really good individuals. And I think this is a side that's very interesting, one that should be good. And you could start to strive to get into the top 10 with Newcastle, but you've got the added, well, not the added bonus, but the added deficit, which could turn into a bonus potentially in the future, that you've got an owner that wants to leave the club, Mike Ashley. It's been something that hasn't been a secret for years, and could be an interesting dynamic if a new owner comes in very quickly. But these team guides are designed for people who are maybe inexperienced at Football Manager, those who potentially don't know a lot about the game, maybe don't know a lot about Newcastle United, and just want to learn something before they start their save. So these are the videos for you. We're going to go through a few of the elements of your save. So we're going to look at the club vision, any new players that Newcastle have signed, the dynamics of the club, the tactic I'd recommend, and any youngsters to watch. So these videos aren't really for those of you who are mega experienced at FM, but if you've got any tips or tricks for those who aren't maybe so experienced, feel free to leave them down in the comments and I'm sure it will help somebody out. But let's have a look through the club vision then. So there's 2 elements of the club culture here at the top, and those are not to sign players over the age of 28, and to develop players using the club's youth system. Now, you have to take into account with Newcastle that given that Mike Ashley is looking to sell the club, these could all change, which makes things very tricky. And I guess, well, I can't preempt the future. I can only tell you what I would do if I was managing the club now. Bear in mind, these 2 elements of club culture aren't really all that important. You can see not signing players over the age of 28 is preferred, but if you find an absolute stonker who's 30 or 31, I don't think the club are going to be too bothered. And the same really goes for developing players using the club's youth system. If you want to buy externally, then fair enough. I mean, you couldn't really buy internally, could you? Food for thought there. In terms of the 5-year plan then, you can see Mike Ashley is someone who just really is in it for the money now. Sign players to sell for a profit, sign young players to develop for a profit, so that's an interesting one. Something that I'd actually quite enjoy. Being a bit of an entrepreneur myself, I quite like buying low and selling high. I get quite a buzz off that, and I'm sure everybody does. So signing players to sell for a profit is an interesting one, and obviously the other one is working within wage budget, which is exactly what every Premier League club need to do. Club currently spending $1,334,000 on wages, and in total there are $1,394,000. So you've got £60,000 a week to play with at the start of the save. So in terms of the current season, then obviously Newcastle haven't got any European football, just the Premier League and the 2 cups, and it is required that you avoid relegation with Newcastle. Now, I think that's an absolutely fair objective. Looking at that, if you have a terrible season, there should be 3 sides in the league that you're better at, namely West Brom, probably Fulham. I wouldn't say Leeds, because Leeds are a pretty good side, and I'd say there's 5 or 6 clubs that are worse. Maybe even 8 or 9 that are worse than Leeds. I think you're probably better than Aston Villa, although that's maybe debatable. Brighton, Burnley, you're sort of up maybe in that Crystal Palace area. So 12th or 13th, I think, is where they finished last year. They finished 13th. So about there would be about right. So that avoid relegation is quite nice, I'd say. I think mid-table would be more of an expectation. And the club desperately wanted to reach the 5th round of the FA Cup. Now, that is the 3rd round that you play in, because you start at the 3rd round, which I think is the last 64 stage, isn't it? Yeah, it's the last 64. So they want you to get to the last 16. And in the EFL Cup, similarly, want you to get to, I think it is the last 16 there as well. Yeah, the 4th round. There's one less stage in the EFL Cup. So the Cups are fairly important to Newcastle this year. You can see that the FA Cup is more important than the Carabao Cup. Carabao Cup only being a preferred objective 2 out of 4. And as I always say with these team guides, if you go and win the EFL Cup and get relegated, that ain't going to be enough, because the club want you to focus on the Premier League. Make sure you avoid relegation. But for example, if you only reach the 4th round of the FA Cup and go and win the EFL Cup, then the club are going to be okay with that. A bit of a bad example with Newcastle because these two are requirements, but you hopefully get what I'm trying to say. In terms of the third season, then the board attempts to make the club self-sustainable, and the board will do that behind the scenes. There's nothing you really got to do there, apart from not spending crazy amounts of money, which is going to be difficult in Mike Ashley at the helm anyway. But to be fair, quite a healthy transfer budget at 16 million. And after that, Mike Ashley's looking to sell the club. So not really long-term in terms of objectives. So just plan for now, really. Don't just avoid relegation this year at the least, and just build from there. New players then at Newcastle. They've done some good business in my opinion. Callum Wilson is one of their signings. He's probably the biggest signing of the summer, the 28-year-old. You can see he's got a 4-star ability. £20 million from Bournemouth. He's played in the Premier League for 5 seasons with Bournemouth and got quite a healthy goal-scoring record. And he's really going to be your main striker, to be honest. Alan St Maximin and Andy Carroll coming behind him, but St Maximin is more of a winger. And Andy Carroll, well, I think in real life he's finished, to be truthful, but I think in Football Manager he doesn't look a bad player. I mean, he's a bit too aggressive, but his jumping reach, his balance, his strength, all things that are needed to be a target man, he's pretty good at. So he's certainly a player that could be used, but Callum Wilson's going to be a main striker. A good bit of business there done by Newcastle. Second biggest signing is Jamal Lewis, the £14 million signing from Norwich City, who have been relegated to the Championship this year. So he's had a season's experience in the Premier League. You can see he comes in at first choice. I mean, Matt Ritchie's never going to play as a left-back, is he? Plus the age, plus the fact he's 30 years of age. Again, Paul Dummett's 28. He's a decent left-back, but maybe somebody who could go out. I mean, there's a few clubs interested in him, and given that he's been at Newcastle all of his career, it might be a tough one to sell if you're a Newcastle fan, but I think you could get a decent amount for him and maybe recoup some of the amount you spent on Jamal Lewis. Another interesting sign is Ryan Fraser, the free transfer from Bournemouth. A cracking signing this, to be honest, especially for free. I know he was linked with Tottenham at one time, so Newcastle will be chuffed to have got him for free. Plenty of Premier League experience. He can play on either wing, and that's always good to have versatility. You can see that he's fairly well pegging, fairly level pegging with Mikel Almiron and Alan St Maximin on that left wing, and that's really where he'll play because you've got St Maximin, who's more a right winger, and Almiron, who's more of a central attacking midfielder, and I've reflected that in the tactic, which I'll show in a minute. The other big signing is Jeff Hendrick, who's come in for free from Burnley. Again, another end of contract signing, and another solid one in midfield. He'll come in alongside John Joe Shelvey. Then you've got Sean Longstaff, the 22-year-old youngster, and Isaac Hayden as well as a backup option. I can't believe he's been at Newcastle for 5 years now. Not really much in terms of the outs. I have to admit, I've never heard of this Mikel Merino, but he's gone for 10 million. Even though they signed him for 8 million the year before. Very, very strange. Not quite sure what happened there. But let's have a look at the dynamics at Newcastle then. Not really too many problems here. You're not surprised that you've got Jamal Lascelles and John Joe Shelvey, the captain and the vice-captain, as team leaders. Andy Carroll is a team leader as well, and that might be a struggle if you choose to sell him. But, you know, again, as I've said, he's not a bad player in the game. He's played for my beloved Liverpool in the past, and yeah, I maybe wouldn't sign him for Liverpool, but he's certainly a good player for Newcastle. I really think that. Certainly as an impact player, I think. He's a completely different striker to Callum Wilson. Callum Wilson's much more of an advanced forward, a role that you can see that Andy Carroll's not great at, really, with his acceleration being quite sluggish. But as a target man, he's great, to be honest. Finishing 14. A lot of these stats are very, very high in the greens, and he's an asset for Newcastle, ultimately, and being a team leader, he should have a good influence in the dressing room. So bear that one in mind. Highly influential players, Matt Ritchie, Paul Dummett. Who's this Gillespie? Never heard of him. Mark Gillespie. Never heard of him. He's just signed on a free transfer from Motherwell. That's probably why I've never heard of him. But I wouldn't worry about this dynamic screen too much at the moment. Obviously, make sure to pay good attention to your team leaders, or else they might get the rest of the squad brassed off. Similarly, try not to upset anybody in these core social groups. You know, if you upset... I mean, Andy Carroll being in that other group is a surprise. Really is. Given that he's a team leader, he's not gelling with the other players, which could cause a problem down the line. I'm not too sure, but interesting. But again, I wouldn't worry too much about these dynamics. I mean, Callum Wilson is probably a player who might go up to that team leader stage a little bit later on. Maybe Martin Dubravka, perhaps he's an experienced goalkeeper. There's chance players like Atsu, Longstaff, though, who is a Newcastle youngster through and through. I think Sean Longstaff might be somebody who stays at the club and might well fill in that John Joe Shelvey role, potentially, in the future. In terms of the tactic I've chosen, I've gone for the fluid counter-attack. I feel like this suits Newcastle quite well. Don't worry particularly about these players who are injured. They're just injured at the start of the game, so after a few weeks, this is really the side I'd look to start with. Dubravka in goal. I have been impressed with Martin Dubravka ever since he signed for Newcastle 3 years ago now. He had that loan spell from Sparta Prague at the club, and he's really your first choice goalkeeper with Carl Darlow on the bench, and obviously the third choice, who we discussed earlier, Mark Gillespie, in the reserves for now. Jandre, Yedlin, Lascelles, Shaw, and the new signing Jamal Lewis at the back. Shaw and Lascelles are really the first choice, aren't they? Federico Fernandez being first choice. Then we've got Paul Dummett, probably fifth choice, and Kieran Clark, the former Aston Villa player. He's been at Newcastle 5 years now. Goodness me. And he's really a fourth choice. But I think he's a player that if you can get rid of him, he's somebody interested in him. There you go. Brighton are interested in him in a transfer. £35,000 a week, which isn't small for Newcastle. I think I'd maybe get rid of Kieran Clark. So there's a young kid in the development sense, which we'll talk about in just a minute, who can come in and replace Kieran Clark. You can get a few million for him. It's a no-brainer, in my opinion. We've got Jeff Hendrick and John Joe Shelvey in the midfield. John Joe Shelvey, the much more attacking midfielder. Jeff Hendrick staying back as a deep line playmaker. You can see he suits that role quite well, and he's quite good in terms of his positioning, which will help at the back. And John Joe Shelvey, more of an attacking midfielder. And then this front four, is really, really solid. Alan St-Maximin, Miguel Almiron, Ryan Fraser, and Callum Wilson. We've talked a little bit about all of these four players. You've got Andy Carroll, who can come on as a bench player, an impact player. I'd recommend putting him as a target man, because he's not really one of those who scores a lot on the counter, if you like. But Miguel Almiron, being a shadow striker, could fill in for him, and I think that would be quite a nice dynamic actually having him there. But Callum Wilson's really the first choice. You've also got Joe Linton on the bench, a half decent player, but really Callum Wilson's first choice, isn't he, every day of the week? I feel like there's a bit of dead wood here, maybe the likes of Matt Ritchie, is a good player, but Burnley are interested in signing him. I think there's a lot of players here you could get rid of and bring some better replacements in. You can see some of these players are already transfer listed by default. Christian Atsu, 28. Again, I can't see him getting into the first team with those two on the wing. Henry Save, again, not a player who's really going to get into the first team. Rolando Aarons, the same goes for him. We talked about Kieran Clark, Jacob Murphy. Got Matty Longstaff here, Sean Longstaff's brother, who should come in the midfield. He should be quite a good player. As you can see, he's really fifth choice at the moment. But the Longstaff brothers could well be together in the midfield in the future. John Joe Shelvey's only 28. It feels like he's older than that, because he was at Liverpool. Only at Liverpool 2 years. No, he was there for 4. He went out on loan to Blackpool for a season. Yeah, there you go. But some decent players here, and some certain players to develop. I mean, Dwight Gale is someone who isn't going to be good enough for the Premier League. He's the typical Championship striker, isn't he? And not really good enough for the Premier League, I have to say. So finally, into one of my favourite screens on Football Manager. This is the Development Centre, where Joe Joyce, your Head of Youth Development, puts together a nice report here you can see of a few elements. You've got your first team candidates here, players that are probably good enough already to go into the first team squad, albeit as fringe players. You've got Yannick Touré here, the 19-year-old Swiss. He's been at the club for a few years. Looks like he could be a decent player, but nothing fantastic, so I'll probably keep him in the under-23s. You've got your ones to watch here, 5 players, and this will change over time, of course. 5 players who are ones to watch. I mean, Elliot Anderson gets good praise. Apparently, he could be as good as Miguel Almiron, and Miguel Almiron's a solid player. Again, a few other players here. Bradley Cross, he could apparently be as good as Lascelles. Again, that's high praise indeed. And you've got this needs attention screen here, which will change over time for players that maybe need to go out on loan, aren't developing as hoped, and obviously the opposite, and players that are injured, not developing, etc, etc. Let's have a look at the under-23s then. We've got Freddie Woodman, the goalkeeper, out on loan at Swansea. I think he's the obvious successor to Martin Dubravka, really. Out on loan at Swansea. You'll see how he gets on this year. I think he needs to run in the first team to bolster his confidence at the age of 23 now, but see how he gets on at Swansea. And ultimately either sell him, because he's not going to develop to be good enough, or bring him in as an understudy for Dubravka. And you can see one of our coaches here, Amiobi, thinks that he could become as good as Martin Dubravka. We've got Niall Brookwell, who could become a good player. Bradley Cross, we talked about earlier. We've got Ryan Barrett, Daniel Langley. A lot of players here who could be fairly decent, but really the top 3 are the only outstanding players, I would say. So keep an eye on those. Again, anybody below, I mean, the likes of Mohamed Sangar, anyone who's really 21, 22. I mean, you can see Florent in Delcia and Dallacio, I mean, he's not good enough. Get rid of him. You get to 21, 22, and if you're not going to develop to a first team standard, you might as well get rid of the player. It might be a low fee you get for the player, but it's better than paying them wages for a year when they're never going to have a chance of getting to the first team. The under-18s, have a quick look at this. I mean, I do take the under-18s with a bit of pinch of salt because obviously the players are younger, so there's more of a differential between what they could be and what they actually turn out to be. For example, Elliot Anderson could become a very good player for the first team in that 3.5-star zone, but he could similarly be a 2-star player. It's very much the difference between being a solid first team player and really ended up as a fringe player. But Elliot Anderson looks like he could be a pretty decent player. We've talked about him earlier, actually. Josh Harrison, Joe White, but I think, as Neil Winskull says, the under-18s manager, unfortunately, the reality is that this is a rather mediocre development squad. So really look to the under-23s, I'd say. You've got a few players out on loan. See how they got on. Again, I've said Freddie Woodman earlier and a few others. See how they get on this year and maybe next year try and bring them into the first team. I think Bradley Cross is a good one, as it says here, to send out on loan. He wants a bit of first team football, and I think next year, as we've said, maybe with Kieran Clark leaving the club, might be an opportunity to bring him in as 5th or 4th choice. But Newcastle have got a decent squad, I think they have, and I think they're certainly top 10 contenders if you manage them correctly. That's going to be it anyway for today's Team Guide. I hope you guys have found it beneficial. This is what I do these videos for, and it's nice to have a look at each Premier League club and learn something myself, because I'm a Liverpool fan. I don't know a hell of a lot about the other Premier League clubs outside of their first team, so nice to know about some of the youngsters who I'm sure will rock the Premier League in years to come. But leave a like if you enjoyed that. Leave a comment as well if you're stuck with anything or want to tell me about your Newcastle side. That would be great. Maybe what you've learned from this episode. That would be awesome to hear as well. And make sure to subscribe for daily Football Manager 2021 content. I'm currently doing a beta save with Wolves. It's just enters its second season. We've qualified for the Europa League, and things are starting to look up. It's been a good start for us. We've played 7 or 8 matches, and we're about 5th or 6th in the league. So come and join the journey where you watch me play Football Manager for real, and see if I can talk the talk and walk the walk, or maybe just talk the talk. We'll see. But thank you for watching. As I said, if you found this beneficial, leave a like. But I've been TIJ Gaming, and until the next one, I will see you guys later. Goodbye for now.